Alright, so here's the next song. I know we haven't rehearsed it or anything yet, but I made a lead sheet that's super easy to follow. You should just be able to sight read it. There you go. Okay. One, two, three, four. My fellow bassists, welcome back. So that little skit was actually based on my own personal experience when I went to Berklee for the first time, and they handed me a lead sheet for the first time in my life. I asked them where the bass line is, and they said that I have to improvise my own bass line using the chords on the page, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. This is an incredibly common scenario, even at some major professional gigs, and judging by the comments that I've seen from you on Patreon, it seems like a lot of you have experienced this as well. Luckily, since that first embarrassing moment at Berklee, I've played hundreds of gigs that have involved sight reading a lead sheet, and using all of that experience, I've come up with a simple 6-step process that will allow you to play through any song that you've never seen before and make it sound like you know it well. There's also a downloadable cheat sheet in the description that explains all of the most common chord symbols and other instructions that you see on a lead sheet. Alright, but first things first, I just want to make one thing really clear. A chord chart looks like this and has basically no information other than the chords themselves. A lead sheet looks like this and it has the chords, melody, lyrics, and other important instructions like band hits. And a score looks like this, and it's basically just every single instrument's part in one book. As bassists, we're most often presented with lead sheets, probably next followed by chord charts. And since chord charts are basically just a dumbed down lead sheet, we're going to be focusing on lead sheets today. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume the worst case scenario where you're on stage and the band leader just hands you a lead sheet for a song that you've never seen or heard before. The very first thing that you should do in this situation is a quick scan of the whole lead sheet and take note of the song structure and time signature. Also, make sure you look out really carefully for the signs or segnos, because you'll have to jump back to that point later when you see DS al coda. Also look for measures where it says to coda, because that's where you're going to have to jump forward towards the end of the song where the coda is. By this point, the band is probably about to start playing, so step 2 is to start playing only root notes as each chord change occurs. For example, if we take a song like Locked Out of Heaven, which is extremely common on general business or GB gigs, here's what I might play for the first 4 bars of the song if I'd never ever heard or seen this song before. Okay, so that already sounds passable, but pretty boring. So the next step is to add fifths and rhythmic activity. If you start from the root, the fifth of the chord is always either 1 string higher in pitch and 2 frets up, or 1 string lower in pitch and the same fret. The only exceptions are when you're playing minor 7 flat 5 chords and diminished chords. So both of those chords use the flat 5, which you can find by either going 1 string higher in pitch and 1 fret higher, or 1 string lower in pitch and 1 fret lower. And if you see a chord like this, that means that the arranger specifically wants the bass to be emphasizing the note on the right. So play mostly that note, especially on the strong beats. If you have absolutely no idea what I'm going on about right now, you might want to check out this video where I explain the basics of music theory. Okay, so that explains fifths, but how do you know what rhythms to play? When it comes to rhythm, the most important things to know are what subdivisions you're working with and where the band hits are. The lead sheet may explicitly tell you the subdivision or the style, or it might tell you none of those things, in which case you need to figure it out from context. For example, if you're playing jazz at a cocktail hour or really anywhere, you're probably going to be using swung eighth notes. The The most important thing here is just that the band agrees with each other. So if you're completely lost, just listen to what the drummer's playing on the hi-hat and just copy that. So even though I'm seeing Locked Out of Heaven for the first time, I can see in the lead sheet that there are strong accents in both the chords and the melody in the second half of each bar. And from context, listening to the drummer and everyone else in the band, I now know that we're using straight eighth notes. If I know the subdivision and the band hits, then at step 3, I might be able to play something like this. Okay, so now it's starting to sound almost good. Step 4 is to listen to the rest of the band and see if they're doing anything that's not specifically notated or written on the lead sheet. For example, you might have noticed that the band is strongly emphasizing some hits in bars 3 and 4 that are not notated on the lead sheet. In step 3, I didn't play those because there was no way of me knowing that they would come up, but at this point I've probably heard them at least twice and I can assume they're probably going to keep coming up. So here's what I would play over this lead sheet at step 4. Okay, so we've got a really good sounding bass line now, and you probably could just stop here if you wanted to and just keep playing something like that for the rest of the song. Playing roots and fifths with appropriate rhythms and nailing every single band hit is usually enough to keep pretty much everyone happy, but if you're feeling really comfortable and you just want to go the extra mile, you can try adding in some thirds and sevenths. If you're looking at a chord on the lead sheet and you just see the letter with nothing else, that means that it's a major chord, and that means that a major third is available. But if you're looking at the lead sheet and you see the letter and then either a dash or a lowercase m to the right of the letter, that means that it's a minor chord, and now the minor third is available. You might notice on this lead sheet there are no seventh chords, and this is pretty common, especially in rock and pop, but you can still use sevenths as passing notes if you want. If the current chord is minor, you should use the flat 7. And if the current chord is major, you should use the major 7th. So at step 5, I might play something like this. So even though that's not actually the original bass line of the song, it still fits the song really well, and the average person in the audience probably wouldn't even notice that anything was different. Just remember, even when you start adding the thirds and the fifths and the sevenths of every chord, you still want to be hitting the root note as each chord appears. If you hit the third or one of the other notes as each chord appears, it really makes huge changes to the energy and the general mood of the song, and it usually makes it sound less coherent unless you really know what you're doing. So for now, I'd recommend just sticking to the root as each chord change appears. All right, so step 6, which is the last step, is just to always be looking 1 or 2 bars ahead of what you're actually playing. This is definitely the best way to be on top of all the chord changes, band hits, and song structure. If you're always looking a couple of bars ahead, it means that there's a buffer time between you seeing the information and you actually playing it, which means that your brain has more time to process it. This means you'll never be surprised by things like a change in time signature or jump jumping to a coda or really complicated band hits. So as you can hear, following these 6 steps will allow you to create a bass line that actually fits the song really well. You do obviously need to know what all of the chord symbols mean and the other directions, so I made a cheat sheet for you that covers everything you're likely to see regardless of what style of music you're playing. You can get that for free in the description, and if you want to become a complete master of playing great bass lines over chords, check out my Playing with Music Theory course on the Basscamp Patreon, which goes much deeper into exactly how to create great bass lines and solos. I'll also give you tips on how to practice this stuff and how to stay disciplined to a practice routine so that you can master all of these tips in just a few weeks. You can get all of that for free in the description. Thank you so much for coming here and learning with me. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next lesson.